Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. My name is Rafi. Today we're talking to InsaneCaterpilla about men's rights. Please join us on our 4 YouTube channels. Check out our BitChute for merch, and obviously join us on the Roundtable Discord where we do these podcasts every day. Voice chats all the time about everything. And yeah, without further ado, we're going to talk to InsaneCaterpilla about a brief overview of men's rights, rape not applying to women raping men, circumcision, male genital mutilation, child custody, rights to a child, and child support. How are you doing, InsaneCaterpilla?
I'm okay today. Thank you very much for asking. How are you?
I'm great. I'm a little better knowing that we got a podcast done tonight, so I really appreciate you coming on late notice. Yeah, so where would you like to start us off talking about men's rights?
um, okay, I'll give a brief overview. A lot of people think men's rights is just kind of some kind of reactionary view to feminism or some kind of misogynistic thing. But it's really not. What it is because feminism tends to consider women, which is great. A lot of men's rights activists really do think that women deserve rights, and they obviously should have them. But the problem is that feminists tend to enact laws and policies which act against men, and they don't consider them at all.
I see. So you're saying men's rights as a movement is not a reactionary movement. So then what is the foundation of the men's rights movement if it be not reactionary?
Well, it was actually started very much earlier than that. There were earlier versions of the men's rights movement. It's just they never really gained traction. Um, I can't name them offhand. I'm sorry for that, but um, we can go back to say, when women gained the vote, that was a monumentary thing. It was a really important thing for women to have the vote, and I agree that women should have the vote. But the problem was that at the time, only rich people could really vote for anything. Only landowners could vote for anything in terms of government, and that didn't apply to all men. Most men were peasants, and they just worked the land or did jobs. They worked in a blacksmith. They did whatever jobs that were available, and only a few years after wars, which men had to be promised that they would be able to vote universally for going off to die in certain wars, were they granted the rights to vote. Only a few years later were women protesting to have the vote for basically doing nothing.
I see. So we could move into one of your talking points. So talking about women getting to vote soon after and not with the same I guess trials that men had to go through in order to receive those same things. Do you think that applies into the power dynamic between why men can rape women but seemingly women cannot rape men?
Um, I wouldn't. That's a very hard question because I do think it does play into a kind of social dynamic that women are seen as weaker than men, and that a lot of people think it's not possible for a woman to rape a man or something like that, but it's very possible through coercion. Men don't get an erection through some kind of um, turned on or thing. It can be done simply through stimulation. It can be done simply just randomly, as most teenage boys will know. It's not something that indicates they actually want to do that. But a lot of laws in countries such as the UK, where I live, actually specify that it has to be a male penetrating a woman that classifies as rape, not a woman pinning a man down and forcing his penis inside of her. And that's a massive problem because it's exactly the same thing that's happening and exactly the same emotional trauma being inflicted upon him.
Yeah, no, for sure. I absolutely agree. Why do you think that is then? That is the case?
Well, unfortunately, it is sometimes because of feminist lobbying. They have made the argument that um, a woman doing that to a man just isn't possible, that they don't have the capacity unless they're turned on and want it. They've said that it just can't happen. Um, they don't think it's the same. They don't think that men feel the same things inside themselves that women do. And the mind does boggle in how they think that they're so different and so higher than men to actually experience that.
I see. So, I guess if we want to talk about the political differences and the way that women are, advantaged over men, obviously the rape is one situation legally where they're advantaged, and obviously child support and custody is another one. So, would you like to talk about that next?
Well, when it comes to children, there are a lot of nuance points here. There really are. Um, but the prevailing view in society is that women are best viewed to look after kids. And whereas that may be true some of the time, it's equally not true some of the time as well. Now, I think that both parents deserve, and the child deserves, to have both parents play a part in their lives. And I don't think that any one parent should have some kind of overriding thing that,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just judges do tend to favor women. It's shown out in the statistics.
What are examples of judges favoring women in court systems?
Oh, well, I mean, if we go outside child support, we can go outside and say that women are given lower sentences, they're less likely to be charged, they're less likely to be arrested for exactly the same crime as a man commits.
Okay. Are there any other ones related to child custody that they have obvious advantage in? Obviously, actually getting the custody, but are there any other places where they're extremely advantaged?
Well, yes, I mean, there are specialized family lawyers. Um, they tend to advise women to make claims of domestic violence or abuse against the children in order to gain um, more custody of the children and more child support, more alimony, anything like that. They will advise them to do that because they know it will work.
So then you're saying the men's rights movement isn't a reactionary movement to feminism, but is it a reactionary movement to this being the system in place in the courts?
Um, that is a good question. It's not, what I would say is that it's not solely a reaction to feminism, but we do have to address it because feminism has brought in many discretionary measures against men, which which are used in courts and policies around the world.
Like what? Like the
Well,
ones
we
we
could,
already talked about, or
well, I could give a perfectly good example. We could say the National Organization for Women. Okay, that's in Australia. They lobbied against the presumption of equal shared custody for men and women when they get divorced between their children. And they argued against that as a feminist organization because men are abusive.
oh,
That's
okay,
just that's just one example,
hmm
which I'm thinking of off the top of my head.
okay. So then I guess the next obvious question is what should one be cautionary if they're like say getting an out of like if they're having a divorce and they're with somebody and they have, you know, children and there's a custody issue, what situations are men going to want to look out for and what are they going to want to try to do?
Well, I mean, well, what I would hope is that it would never come to that in the first place. But before that, I would really strongly consider for men what is the worth in getting married in the first place? Because what benefit does it give you? I would also consider never leaving the home. That is your home, and being in that home with your child plays a lot of the part in what the courts consider. If it's a mother and a child in a home and you've moved out and gone somewhere else, well then the courts are gonna favour where they are now. And they're gonna just separate it. So it's 75% them and 25% you, and you'll be separated from your child.
So if you could change this system, how would you change it right now?
It's really difficult to say that because I'm not all knowing or something like that. But
Mhm.
I would want it to be completely 50-50. I would want both mother and father to be involved as much as possible in their time with their child and not have it be more one than the other in ideal circumstances. As long as no one is abusing them or hurting them, that's what should happen.
Complete 50-50. And what do you think the ramifications of the a complete 50-50 favoring system would be? Do you think like in terms of the social aspects of the men's rights movement, feminist movements and voting, how do you think a 50-50 voting system would affect those?
I'm I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm sorry.
Like if the system was set so it was divided 50-50 in custody from the get-go and that was what it was always favoring, how do you think that would affect the men's rights movement and the feminist movement today?
Well, I think it would really make it so we could move closer together. Really, I think it would, if everyone could agree that that was a reasonable solution, that we'd be able to find more common ground and actually work on issues that separate us.
Yeah, for sure. um so I just want to look over your talking points before we see. Yeah, did think about this. I did think I forgot something. So, before I ask you more off the cuff questions, you did want to bring up circumcision, and since we were still talking about the court systems, and I guess that sort of relates to the government, which is Medicare and everything like that. What is your opinion relating to men's rights and circumcision?
I view circumcision as male genital mutilation, and that is not without precedent. It is the exact same as removing a woman's clitoral hood. And I do not agree with either of them because they are both abhorrent practices, sorry, which should not they just shouldn't happen. People shouldn't be cutting up babies like that. They shouldn't be cutting up toddlers or children. They shouldn't be doing any of that. And it's all abuse. And no one should do that to any unconsenting child until they're of age.
So, do you think circumcision has a place in society if it's of age, or do you think it should be abolished entirely? And is the I guess my real question is the only problem is that it's child abuse.
The only problem is that it's child abuse. If someone reaches the age of 18 and they want to get circumcised, then that's their choice. I'm not taking away choice from anyone, but a child cannot make a choice.
Yeah, I'm gonna add into that. By the way,
Well,
hello.
hold
I'm
on.
also
That's
No,
all right.
Bluey, you're not right now.
That's all right. We'll open it up to questions at the end, Blue, because this is an interview. It's just question and answer right now, and then we'll open it up to questions eventually. But so, Insane Caterpillar, why do you think that circumcision is mutilation? I mean, I know it seems like a silly question, but I want your opinion of why you think it's mutilation.
Well, circumcision removes the foreskin, and there's no real guidelines on how much of the foreskin is removed. Now, there are some very extreme um, medical issues which can necessitate circumcision. Okay, can we who's doing that?
Sorry, that was me. I thought I had myself muted. I'm so sorry. Continue.
Thank you. There are some medical issues which do necessitate circumcision, but they are very few, and many can be solved with traditional means through stretching and things like that. But to do this to a little baby boy, when I have to say the prepuce isn't even supposed to be separated from the glands until around puberty. It's not supposed to be drawn back and it's not supposed to be washed. It has nothing to do with cleanliness at all. And most of the studies that were done in Africa have been totally debunked. They are not valid. They are not credible in any scientific journal. There's no benefit to circumcision whatsoever. So
For
what we
sure.
have what we have to do is make sure that a human's integrity is maintained until they can make a choice for themselves. If they want to get circumcised, then that's up to them. I'm not against taking away choice from people, but I am against taking away choice from people who would harm them when they don't want it to be done.
Well, wow. And I guess my next question is, does that relate, do you think, philosophically to the way men are viewed in society and relates to, men's rights, where, men obviously are circumcised against their wishes when they're at a young age. And then, obviously with men's rights, potentially then obviously men are disadvantaged in the court system. So do you think that's a thing that is against men from the get-go, like the system is?
Unfortunately, there have been studies that were done which have showed brain trauma in infants that have had circumcisions performed on them, which show increased aggression, increased risk of autism, depression, and all kinds of different symptoms like that. Not symptoms, sorry, issues.
Yeah,
And
diagnoses. Yeah.
yeah, um, and it's really sad. I think it does play a lot because female genital mutilation, even a single pinprick, not removing anything on a clitoris, is banned. But removing the entire foreskin of a male is not. And I think that does speak a lot to how we view boys and girls when we can do all that to a little boy but do nothing to a girl. I don't think either should be acceptable.
And that relates back to the 50-50 system in the courts that you were talking about, right? So that would be a
Yes.
50-50 system throughout all of society. So that's very interesting. I guess with circumcision, that comes with the question: are there any other places that men are disadvantaged systematically that I guess are more hidden than others that one wouldn't really expect?
Um, I mean, I could really bring up many things, but I think affirmative action would have to be one of them.
And what's affirmative action?
Affirmative action would be hiring people based on their, in this case, on their sex or their gender orientation. I don't think anyone should be hired based on their sex or their gender orientation. I think they should be hired based on their merit, their experience, what they can do for the role they're placed in. I think that putting people in a role as they're born and knows what they
More by
can do.
definition.
Keep going if you can.
I think that placing people in a role based on what they look like rather than what they can do as a person is very wrong, no matter if that's positive or negative. That's why I disagree with things like affirmative action.
Wow. So that's pretty interesting. Do you have any maybe final points you'd want to add? Because I think maybe we'd have some people who'd want to ask you some questions about this and maybe add some stuff of their own.
Yeah, of course, I'm very welcome to any questions. I would like to add that a lot of people view the men's rights movement as some kind of misogynistic, hateful movement which hates women, and I'd like to assure people that we really don't. What we want is for things to be equal between women and men, not in opportunity of outcome, which is what feminists argue for. They think that no matter what you do, you should have the same result. What men's rights activists want is what you get is what you work for. If you do nothing, you don't get anything. That's how it works. I will need to be right back just for a second here.
All right.
Okay.
If yeah. Well, hold
He's
on, Ish. I'll just say if anyone who came from Insane Caterpillar's server and has men's rights something to say, if they'd like to add something onto what he was saying while we're waiting for him to come back, I would be open to that.
he's
Anyone?
just listening to a lot of MRA movements, but I'm gonna be honest. I want to ask him something that might make him uncomfortable.
Well, just remember family vibe while we're in here.
Nah, it just means not
It's
provoking.
respectful, but the
Um,
views will make
I'm
him
gonna
uncomfortable.
unmute Blue Orange and see if he has anything to say as well. Blue Orange, do you have anything to say?
Hey,
You
yeah,
unmuted.
thanks. Apologies for interrupting. I was not aware that was the situation.
That's all right. Yeah.
I will add a little bit. I'm also an admin of the men's rights server. I've known Insane for many years. I'm kind of a full-time men's rights activist, if you will. I can expand a bit on the damage of circumcision. Circumcision removes the majority of erogenous tissue from the male organ. There's a kind
Hey,
of
sorry to stop you there. It's not proven. You can't make the claim.
it is proven. There's a kind of
It's
nerve
not.
ending called Meissner's corpuscles. Okay, and the two most sensitive parts of the male organ, one of them is the frenulum, one of them is the ridge bands. They have the highest concentration of Meissner's corpuscles, and they are almost entirely removed during circumcision. The ridge band is always removed, and the frenulum is usually removed. So the majority of these
Exactly.
Meissner's corpuscles are removed.
It's really hard to say that circumcision removes X number of nerve endings because I've seen the studies. They do say there is one which was quoted that was 20,000 nerve endings, which is remarkable. Actually, it's more than the glycerol horn. But those haven't been sourced, and you
I
can't
can send
prove
you
them.
my source. I'll send you my sources if you'd like.
No, you can, but they haven't been proved, Blue. Please.
If
They
you guys
have.
would like to post your sources in the voice chat text, and if you guys have any, I'll put them in the description of this podcast, and may potentially show some clips of it while they go on. So if anyone has any sources, please post them there,
Okay,
and that'd be perfect.
I will post an old Reddit post that I did that has multiple quotes and citations and links. Instead of just like, I could link like 20 links, but I'll just do one nice little link to that post so we can kind of browse through. Does that work?
So it's called Voice, and it's under music in the Roundtable channel, right? So you can post all your links there. If anyone else has any links related to men's rights or anything that went on here, I'll post them there. If as long as they're related. So Insane Caterpillar, you before you left, you were in the middle of like kind of summarizing what the philosophy of the men's rights movement is. I'd give you an opportunity to finish saying that before we really do open the floor completely to questions and other opinions.
I mean, I think I did give it quite clearly. Was there a part you thought I didn't explain?
No, I was just wondering if because you had to leave, I was wondering if you had anything else to add.
No, I made sure to finish it first.
All right, perfect. So if anyone else has anything to add, we'll open this up for questions for Insane Caterpillar, and we'll also open it up for anyone who has opinions about men's rights themselves and questions in relation to those. We'll keep the questions related to people other than Insane Caterpillar relatively short, but if they're going directly between Insane Caterpillar and somebody else, obviously, we can keep them going. So yeah, if anyone has anything to say, the floor is now open.
If it's okay before we start, I may direct questions to Blue Orange if I feel like it. If that's all right with both of you.
Yeah, sure. If as long
Fine
as
with
it's
me.
what's communicated.
Fine with me.
Okay.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? We got a lot of people here. I'm sure there's someone with a question.
Insane Caterpillar, I wanted to ask you a kind of uncomfortable question, but I guess you know the answer. What's your thought on the MGTOW movement? Well, it's not a movement; it's supposedly a lifestyle. Because I've been around to those community service, and I've also been into those podcasts, and they all say it's very similar things to the MRA.
Hmm. Well, the MGTOWs are. I do think it's more of a view rather than a movement. It's viewing themselves as more important than pursuing relationships and pursuing women. Um, that's the real thing I think about it. I don't know much about um the way they view others or the supposed hate that's been cast onto them. But I would just say it's a philosophy of thinking of yourself first and putting yourself first before other people, which is a fair philosophy, to be honest.
Yeah, pretty much that's what they say, and I kind of lean towards that. But the thing is that I don't want to give up on trying to make a family, if you know what I mean. One thing
Yeah,
that I find it
neither do I.
interesting, it's just one thing I find it interesting about the MGTOW movement is, well, not movement, sorry, the community, is that they also point out that it's also happening in other countries. Like in Japan, you hear about these guys called Hobowar men, which are Japanese men who basically opted out of society. And right now, there's you could say some type of MGTOWish going on in China, where the guys they're giving up because they're having this 996 culture thing going on. So yeah, I'm. It's very interesting that it's happening globally.
I mean, I would call those shut-ins. Shut-ins. I mean, they've just kind of shut themselves off from the rest of society because it's so harsh and cruel to them. They just prefer to stay inside and not get involved with anything. It's not really so much about not getting involved with women. It's about shutting yourself off from all the society and things outside as a whole. I do think it's a separate issue to just MD Town on its own.
I mean,
Sorry, just to ask
plenty of
quickly, was it voice that I'm supposed to post the links to?
Yes, voice, please.
Okay, it's just been done, so I just posted it. Sorry.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
all right. So, plenty of MGTOWs simply just believe in not like their lives not revolving around women in acquiring women, and like it's crazy because there's a lot of branches of this. Like you got some women hater MGTOWs that openly admit that they hate women. and then you've got the more moderate ones that are just, just don't want their whole life to revolve around women anymore, because that's kind of like the thing society teaches us is like, you got to get a girl, you got to wife her up, and you got to have kids, kind of thing. And they're just seeing it's not worth it due to the disproportionate treatment of men and women. And what else? MGTOWs also, they just don't just shut themselves. They're not even shut-ins. Like, it means going your own way, right? So you just basically, stop letting society dictate what you find important, and you just do what you think is important. That's really the philosophy behind it. At least that's what
That's
I've
why
gotten from it so far when I looked into it.
that's why I kind of followed them for a bit, because it kind of correlates to my libertarian beliefs. But at the same time, yeah, the problem is with the MGTOW, and that's why I'm not into like 100% into MGTOW, is the fact that they're pretty black pilled about the dating scenes.
I do feel that some people here may be confusing incels with GTOW in the way you're describing them.
Would you, Insane Caterpillar, would you want to define the difference between them for us?
Well, the difference would be when it was brought up hating women. An MGTOW wouldn't hate women; it would just separate themselves from them for their own well-being. But an
Right.
incel would be someone who hates them, who feels entitled to women, and wants to go out there and hurt them because they don't have it.
I was just
Thank
saying
you.
that there are some MGTOWs that are pretty verbal about going their own way, but also hating women. Like, will just say they hate women. I think there's room for all of it, but the main focus is going your own way from society and not letting society dictate what's important to you. That's what makes you a MGTOW. You can get all kinds of flavors of MGTOW in between them.
Well, as with any group, you can say that they overlap in some sense or another, but that doesn't make them share all the same beliefs.
There was this
No.
YouTuber called TFM, and he made a video about the MRA movement, that some of them are going MGTOW. I just find that interesting.
Does anyone else have another question?
I would like to say that most of the videos we post are from Jordan Peterson or Girl Rights What. The Beaver group especially, which are women, by the way. You MRAs really are not out there to attack women. We just really want equality for men.
Yeah, that's like the major difference between the two groups, right? Like, MRA hasn't given up on society. Like, they're fighting for the rights of men. They're not just rolling over and being like, well, if the game's rigged, I might as well give up. Let's cash out and get the heck out of here.
I feel like that's the sentiment right now with most people. Insane Caterpillar, I have one last question, and nothing MGTOW related. A little bit on the conspiracy side. Do you believe feminism is a weapon to destroy society?
No, I
Really?
believe that it can be used that way, but so could so many things. And I think that a lot of people will try and do things to feminism. A lot of powerful feminists will try and say things because it gains them power or prominence or money. And
Because
but
I've noticed some type of overlap between feminism and the Karl Marx philosophy. and I just ever since I noticed that, I also I started to believe in that conspiracy.
No, I mean, I don't personally believe in that at all. I believe that feminism is simply a movement which was started to try and be good, which has been taken over by people which only are interested in money and power. And they don't care about men at all, which is shown in their policies because they discriminate against men.
I have something to say. Last thing, and it kind of branches off what Ish said. That at any point, do you feel like that focusing or honing in on these things, these trivial things, in my opinion, but things that
Trivial.
just things like race and gender and very much many other polar opposites that is introduced into society today as being one or the other, or for or against one or the other, and doesn't have much of an inclusive mindset. And I wanted to ask you if you feel like basically what Ish said, that do you feel like any of these principles, both feminism, even men's rights, if someone focused or honed in on these subjects too much, that they would see much more the differences in other people rather than the connections and how close they are as a species one is?
I mean, that's a bit of a hard question because you can apply that to anything.
InsaneCaterpilla, do you know a
It's like,
ex-KGB named Yuri Bezmenov?
I'm sorry, could you say that again, please?
Sorry, I was eating food. My bad. Do you know this ex-KGB officer named Yuri Bezmenov? He made a fantastic video in the 1980s, and he discussed about psychology warfare.
I'm afraid I don't, but it sounds interesting if you could link us to it.
Okay. This random Indian YouTuber who's a scientist, he re-released that video, and ever since I watched that video, I became haunted by psychology warfare and and other conspiracies. It all kind of like connects the dots in my brain.
I wanted to add something on that. You got to realize, in regards to some of the bigger stories and bigger narratives out there, especially when we're kind of digging into the weeds of feminism versus men's rights activism or even MGTOW, is that every subgroup of human, at least in the way that we categorize ourselves, is given a certain program to follow. Women are given something that appeals to them. Men are given something that appeals to them. Go by race, go by class, any of that nature that we separate ourselves into, and that can filter that then into what we're discussing now and what it is that is going on between the genders themselves and how they're being separated in these various ways.
Okay, what is said about men and women these days is very much men against women, when really it's not that at all. What the real divide is the upper class versus the lower class, the peasants. It's always been the people in power versus the people who don't have power. And the invention of this kind of dichotomy between the men and women is so catastrophic and so damaging to all of us. It's ridiculous. There's absolutely no evidence that men and women didn't get along or that men abused women hundreds of years ago. Absolutely none. None at all. Yet that's what's taught in schools.
I'd have to disagree with that. Women were they were pretty oppressed, They were put in a social caste, housewives, homemakers kind of thing, weren't allowed socially to do most of the things men did. It
And
was considered a woman's place to take care of certain things. And the first few waves of feminism were completely justified. I
No,
think
they
it's
weren't.
the most latest waves of feminism that are just really hyperized.
Are you
And men
sure
were
about that?
forced to do
So do
what?
you agree?
They were forced to go off to war. They were forced to die horribly in wars. They didn't have a choice. They
Okay,
had to
see,
go and serve their lords.
that's not the point
So,
though.
yes, it
That's not,
is.
no, no,
Because
no,
you're
no.
saying women were oppressed. And
Whoa,
they
okay,
weren't.
hang on,
Because men were oppressed too.
hang on. That's the point. Like that is the point, right? No one should be oppressed. No one should be forced to do these things, right? So
If I can
women,
give maybe my perspective on this, would that be okay?
Go ahead, Blue.
Um, Even today, MRAs would agree that misogyny does exist and discrimination against women does exist. So obviously, we recognize that in historical times, yes, discrimination against women, oppression of women, and misogyny were things. But we would argue, though, the idea that men were inherently more privileged as a whole. Yes, the elites, the kings, the presidents, the governors, all that, of course, the nobles, the lords. But for the average man, the average peasant toiling in the field or being sent off to war, I wouldn't argue that the average life for a man was any easier than the average life for a woman. I would say, if you go back to the Middle Ages and you look at the rate of death from childbirth and the rate of death of being conscripted to go fight for some new king's battle, I would say it was pretty equally brutal. And I don't think you can ignore World War One, World War Two. Yes, overall, men were the gender in power. That really didn't help the 18-year-old conscript getting his head blown off.
yeah, I can totally agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Pretty terrible stuff was happening on either side.
Okay. Um, can I just ask, Blue Orange, what is your like opinion on kind of all of this that's happened so far? Since you seem to have a pretty well-rounded opinion on what's going on here. And also, I just want to say, remember that this is a podcast, so remember to take turns. And if you're asking a question to someone, let that person answer your question. Ask your question in full, stop, and let them answer, please. But it's okay so far.
Got it. Understood. Okay, well, I already gave you my thoughts on circumcision. I agree with Insane that when it's done to a child unnecessarily, that it does constitute mutilation. And I find the argument that it's not mutilation because female genital mutilation is worse is a nonsense argument, because you wouldn't say that cutting off someone's hand is okay because cutting off the whole arm is worse. You wouldn't say that stealing is okay because murder is worse. That makes no sense. So something can be mutilation even if something else is worse. And both male and female circumcisions vary in severity. So it's a rather silly argument. It's a rather disingenuous argument, I would say. Then you guys talked about MGTOW and incels and how I feel about it. I always remind people that the men's rights movement is not the same as MGTOW, and we're not the same as incels. Many of our own staff on our very server, as a matter of fact, are either married or with a partner or have children or are engaged. So the idea that the men's rights movement has this vast overlap with incel just isn't true. As for MGTOW, I am personally not MGTOW, but I do understand and I do sympathize. And I think about it too. There are absolutely risks for a man in the dating world in terms of false accusations, in terms of getting divorced and family court and alimony and child support. It's absolutely unquestionably true that family court and divorce court are unfairly skewed against men. So I'm not MGTOW myself, but are those issues something that I keep in the back of my mind? Yes, for sure. What else have we talked about since I joined a little bit? I joined kind of late, so I kind of missed most of what we talked about. I think that's about all I was here for.
Well, it was just men's rights. Rape. Okay, one of the ones that you missed. What you missed was rape applying to men. Rape applying to women and not men, and cultures like legally writing that down that men can't be raped.
No,
was
that would be rape applying to men, them doing it, and not to women when they rape boys.
yes. Sorry.
Oh, well, I mean, I imagine Insane probably said exactly what I would say, that obviously rape against men is a real thing, and a lot of times society ignores it. There are some very sexist laws on the books, and even in countries like the United States, where the law is on paper, in theory, gender neutral, we all know that society kind of reacts differently to it. And absolutely, I've experienced firsthand. It's uncomfortable when a woman is sort of making advances on you and you're not really interested, but as a man, there's this kind of pressure that, oh, you're supposed to, what do you mean you don't want it? You're a man. So that definitely, I do think, is a thing. I do, at least in the United States, I will give feminists credit on this one. I do think one thing feminists do get right is they do recognize male victims of rape. Not so much domestic violence in the US, but at least they do recognize male victims of rape. A very problematic country, however, is India. And I know people are shocked. Really? You talking about India? People's perception of India is that it's very backwards and sexist towards women. And there are regions of India that are like that. Don't forget, India is absolutely huge. I mean, there are 22 official languages, someone in my group was telling me today. Under Indian law, and I can link this too if you'd like, men and boys are not legally recognized as victims of rape. So a man or a boy cannot legally be recognized as a victim of rape, which makes sexually assaulting a man quasi-legal. Now, if it's bad enough, they can maybe charge assault or indecency, but there is no law against raping men and boys in India. Now, a feminist in the US might say, oh, well, surely that's because of patriarchy and gender norms. Nope. And this is what I'll link. In 2013, the government was considering amending the laws on sexual assault to include men and boys. It wasn't going to do anything to hurt female victims. It wasn't going to do anything to change the protection that women and girls already had. All it was going to do was expand the definition so that men and boys could also be included. Feminists protested. And they protested by saying, A, men can't be raped. And B, if we pass this law, we now face the risk of, get this, false accusations. Men making false accusations against women. And the government folded. And as of today, as far as I know, if there's anyone Indian here, and they can correct me, as far as I know, and I'll link the article from 2013, that's still the status today.
I see. Well, thank you for giving us a brief opinion of your perspective. Who was just trying to talk?
Yeah, I have a question. Just real quick. So, what is your take on toxic masculinity?
For Caterpillar or Blue Orange?
Either.
I think that toxic masculinity is it's a bit of a silly thing, really. I mean, you talk about masculinity, you think of all the things that what makes a man a man. Okay, you can think of strength, you think of being a provider, a husband, a father. And when you think of toxic masculinity, you think of the negative aspects of being a man. You think of beating a wife or abusing your children. And I think that saying that masculinity in itself is toxic is just kind of an excuse for portraying villains as all of masculinity. The same way you could say being feminine and being overly flirtatious or dancing around in circles and being promiscuous is unattractive to men. Then those things could be unattractive to women if you're doing them in excess. It's exactly the same thing, and I don't think there is exactly a thing as toxic masculinity. It's just a way to use a word by saying masculinity to shame men, and say they should be different for how they are as a person.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, Athena, go ahead and ask your question. Sure. Directed
Okay,
at Insane
but
Caterpillar.
yeah, just replying to what he said. So basically, surely you can recognize that, I mean, it's normal for all genders, whether male or female, to have traits that are more toxic than others, especially when you see that there's
No,
commonalities, right?
Insane Caterpillar, let her talk, please.
no. I was answering. I'm sorry. I'm saying no. I don't recognize that.
Why?
Why don't I recognize what? That
Why?
the
Why do you
traits are
believe
toxic?
that there aren't? Yeah,
Because
like,
Oh, okay. Well,
let me
it's
ask it in the form of a question.
okay,
perfect.
Why do you not identify some of these traits that are seen as commonplace in either men or women as toxic when they are expressed in a dangerous or um just an ill form?
because I think applying them to men or women in the first place is wrong.
Why?
Because it is. People are different. We're all individuals.
Okay,
Okay.
but surely there are like commonalities between individuals. Like there are certain things that, at
Okay.
least in my view, that different genders are prone to. Do you disagree with that? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't disagree with that.
Right. So if there's an element of something that's a traditionally masculine trait that manifests itself in a toxic way, how is that not an example of toxic masculinity?
I think we disagree on the definition of toxic here. Because you're using toxic to describe an entire sex or gender. And I think that's very wrong.
Athena, I muted you real quick. I'm just gonna say, just keep it to like one question for him, and then let him have his answer, and let other people have their questions, please. But if you do have a final question for him to close that off, you can go ahead and ask it.
I'd rather
Okay,
you leave
sorry.
her. Yeah. No, please continue.
If you have one more question to let Insane Caterpillar give his total final answer on, you can ask it. But otherwise, we'll let it. We'll see if anyone else has another question.
No, that was all.
Okay, thank you very much for asking it. Does anyone else have another question for Insane Caterpillar? And just for this once, we'll open it up if Blue Orange also wants to answer a question, if anyone has one for him as well.
Can I answer something on quote unquote toxic masculinity and so forth? Thank you. Well, I tend to agree with Insane Caterpillar. I believe toxic masculinity is another kind of buzzword that kind of hits at the lowest common denominator of humanity in there. It really kind of denies some of the nuances in masculinity, and I guess in some ways in femininity as well. If you think about it, right? There are light and dark aspects to anything that we have in life. Especially when you're dealing with more esoteric stuff as we do in the server. That said, there are toxic aspects in a certain sense, just to kind of use that buzzword again, in femininity as well. But I feel like they're skipped over because people would forget that as maybe looking kind of cute, or otherwise just give her the benefit of the doubt. I guess more so I should say a negative aspects of femininity as opposed to toxic aspects of femininity. I really don't care for the use of toxic masculinity or toxic femininity, but the idea being here that femininity, the negative aspects are not quite looked at the same as masculine aspects, especially negative masculine aspects are very easy to see. Like you might see someone that's beat up, or you might see, the effect of some kind of a violence, for example, that I guess would categorize the negative aspect of masculinity. Um, you don't see, for example, or you may not see it, for example, when a female is gaslighting someone, or if a female is using manipulative tactics to discredit someone in a group. Things of that nature that could be harmful, but are not openly and overtly seen as harmful by just a general person looking into the situation, unless able to parse the various machinations to each other. But yeah, go ahead.
I feel like I feel like toxic masculinity is too vague of an explanation for any type of behavior, and I think at any point you shouldn't really use that. You should address the actual behavior and not just be like, "Oh, toxic masculinity," and just it just seems too broad.
Join the Roundtable Discord server. We record this podcast every day at 8 o'clock. And like, follow, subscribe, YouTube, BitChute, and hashtag RT Podcast. That's the OCD.